Blocking, Sonic Sway, sidesteps, throw techs, revenge counters. Sparking Zero has a lot of defensive mechanics and every single one of them have their uses, but you can get 90% of what you need defensively by just focusing on two: perception and super counters. In this video, I'll tell you how to actually defend in Sparking Zero, starting with those two big mechanics, and I'll briefly touch on everything else, but just know from the get-go that if you master perception and super counters, you'll be good. Perception! We're going to be using standard controls and PlayStation buttons for the whole video. This works on classic and on other consoles as well. You're just going to have to translate the buttons is all. Perception is done by holding down the circle button. Your character will assume a counterattack stance and your ki will slowly deplete over time. So this isn't free, but the reward it gives you is huge, so it's definitely worth the cost. Let me show you why. In this game, there is three-way blocking. You can block in neutral, or you can block high attacks or low attacks. The problem with this is that you kind of have to guess, because these attacks are way too quick. Well, instead of guessing, you can just hit the perception button, and no matter what the attack is, you will not only block it, you will also counterattack, and you'll usually end up with an advantage. Now, sometimes you may also get something called a Sonic Sway, which is when your character does this. This is basically you timing the perception button right before the opponent hits you. You're gonna dodge their attacks in the cinematic and drain their meter, and you can even do some follow-up attacks with most characters, so you get some damage as well. We're not really gonna talk about Sonic Sway too much though, because let me tell you a secret. 90% of the time, it's an accident. Perception is just so good that you're always hitting the button. So inevitably, a Sonic Sway is gonna happen once in a while. Even if you're not going for it, but hey, it's alright if you get it. No one is complaining, it's nothing but a win for you. You do need to understand that perception doesn't always counter everything, especially when you don't have any skill points. With zero skills, perception only really counters rush combos, which are very basic attacks. Everything else, it will simply lose. So you gotta keep an eye on your skill points. That said, once you have at least one skill point, then perception is gonna become super perception and counter almost everything. Now, I did say almost, and that's because perception loses to four things. It loses to grabs, it loses to ki blasts, it loses to attacks from the back, and it loses to ultimates. That's right, even blast attacks will get deflected by perception, though this costs you 2 skill points. I'm not sure it's worth it. You do get a ki charge boost, so it depends on the character, I guess. If I'm running a character that has full power though, I can just use those 2 points to get back to full ki immediately. But if a character doesn't have something like that, maybe they can use the buff. Ultimates, however, cannot be defended with perception, no matter how many skill points you have. Now, even though there is counterplay to perception, defensively, you have a couple of tools you can use to minimize this. One of them is spamming block. This one does not work on classic controls, and it's one of the reasons why standard is actually superior. If you hold perception and spam the block button at the same time, you will automatically tech every single throw. So perception is up against attacks, and you are teching the throw by mashing that button. They cannot get in. So that's what you do against throws. Against ki blasts, one of two things might happen. One is that they're just throwing ki blasts, and in that case, you should just stop using perception and block those ki blasts or deflect them. But on the other hand, if they're using ki blasts and approaching you, that usually means that they're gonna try to go from a ki blast into a melee combo. If it's the second one, just keep holding perception, because not many characters can actually do a true ki blast into melee combo. And because there is a little gap, perception will kick in when they try to punch you. Now, there are characters that have a true combo from ki blasts into melee. The most notable of those characters is probably Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta, so he can counter perception easier than other characters. You gotta be extra careful around characters like him. But in general, just keep holding perception if you think they're gonna attack with melee combos. And finally, if a character is trying to get behind you, all you gotta do is let go of perception and press it again. Your character will auto-turn towards your opponent. That said, there is no way to defend against all of these counters simultaneously, so at the end of the day, a better opponent can mix you up and catch you countering the wrong thing. And that is gonna end with you in a combo, at which point, your best bet is super counters! Super counters are a form of combo breaking in Sparking Zero. By timing up plus the square button with the opponent's attacks, you're gonna break their combo for free. Now, the opponent isn't helpless in this situation, and very often this will lead into a Vanish War. Because super counters are currently not that hard to pull off, Vanish Wars are what dominates the meta nowadays. The entire game revolves around them, so it's very important to understand them. In a Vanish War, assuming both players keep vanishing by timing the block button correctly, the player that has the most ki will eventually win. And that's because without ki, you cannot vanish anymore. At that point, they can hit you with all the vanishing attacks they want, so sometimes it's better for you to just take the hit than to pointlessly spend all of your ki only to lose your health in the end as well. That said, there are some things that you can do, and we'll get to those soon. Also notice that during a Vanish War, the more you vanish, the more your skill gauge goes up, but so does your opponent's. This is another reason to not simply vanish if you're losing, because you might be giving your opponent enough skill points to just fill up on ki with an instant spark, or give him perhaps another Alter Image strike that you're gonna have to deal with. And that's why part of playing defense in Sparking Zero is to always have more ki than your opponent. And this is why full power and instant spark skills are the best ones you could have right now. Balance patches and other changes might end up shaking up the meta, but as the game stands right now, this is what defines competitive Sparking Zero. Now, if you are lower on ki than your opponent, not all hope is lost. There is a way for you to counter them without spending ki, and that is to super counter again. The timing is much tighter than a regular Vanish, which is why many players will opt to play it safe. But if you're gonna lose the Vanish War anyway, just risk a super counter. If they keep vanishing your super counters, they will keep spending meter, so maybe just a couple of super counters will be enough for you to get back on top. Just don't forget, everything you can do can also be done by your opponent, so they might super counter you back. And there is actually one more thing you can do, but it's character specific tech. There are a couple of characters that can simply sway out of a Vanish War, but only if they are the ones that started the Vanish War. That said, not many can do this, and because it's situational, you might never even see it. And if you've made it this far in the video, I would like to say congratulations! You now know how to defend in Sparking Zero. Perception and super counters account for 90% of defensive gameplay. Master these two and you're golden. However, there are others, and they each have their own situational uses. We're gonna go a lot faster through all of these, as they're just not as important as everything we just talked about. And let's start by the simple block. If you watched my combo video, you know that a lot of combos done from the front are fake, and yet a lot of players will still get hit by stuff like this. This is simply because they are not holding the block button. If your opponent likes to extend combos too, and they will simply drop the combo. Besides, you can activate perception while blocking too, so you can use that to your advantage. And then there's also vanishing. Many players will do the full auto combo on you, but this is when, much like Vanish Wars, you can time the block button to dodge their attack. Pretty much every heavy attack in this game can be vanished with a well-timed block. And it's even easier to do if the opponent vanishes first. It's like the window is much bigger, and you could just gain their back immediately. And still on vanishing, this one is really important, but most combos into super attacks are actually fake. So if someone sends you flying and follows that up with a super, if you time the block button just right, you will usually vanish and avoid that attack completely. So don't just give up because it looks like you're in a combo. Time your block button and you might escape and punish your opponent too. Sidesteps are also a great counter mashing tool. If you think your opponent is going to attack with rush attacks, a sidestep will easily get out of their way and you will actually gain their back as well. You can also use this offensively to try and get their back if they are spamming perception, because unless they let go and hit the button again, their character will not auto turn to face you. Step-ins are, in my opinion, very underused. When you hit the dodge button without any direction, your character will simply step towards your opponent. And many players don't know this, but this has iframes. It has invulnerability. Now, when you come out of that invulnerability, you can get hit, so if the opponent's just mashing, this isn't guaranteed to get your turn back, but you can use this to dodge heavy attacks and then punish your opponents, or you can step in straight into perception, and that way the mashing will definitely get caught. And finally, let's talk about revenge counters, which a lot of players seem to believe are useless, and that's not really the case. If you want revenge counters to be your primary combo breaker, then yes, it is a bad option, especially since it costs 2 skills. Like, this is expensive, and it's really not that good if you compare it to super counters. However, if you can be unpredictable in the use of revenge counters, then you can definitely find success. For instance, we've talked about Vanish Wars, and this is a moment where a lot can happen. You and your opponent are both testing each other's reactions. You're looking out for a counter vanish, or a super counter, or a hit. Depending on what your opponent does, you need to hit a different button. And so many players will actually miss the revenge counter option in these situations. So that can be good if you're losing the Vanish War. That said, if you are predictable, because revenge counter is kind of slow, the opponent has a lot of ways to deal with it. And this is why people think it's bad. The safest way to deal with the revenge counter is to simply block, but this is still good for you. If they block your revenge counter, they will have the advantage, but you still broke the combo. You're just back to playing defense. The best thing the opponent can do is land a super counter. It's free, and there's nothing you can do but to go back into the Vanish War if this happens. And if they have enough skill points, they might react with their own perception and throw you right back into that Vanish War as well. But again, you have a lot of defensive options, and each situation is going to give you different ones you can use, so Revenge Counter, if unpredictable, can actually come in clutch. At the very least, try not to die with skill points left unspent. If you're gonna lose the character anyway, why not try it out, see if your opponent is paying attention. And that's how you actually defend in Dragon Ball Sparking Zero. If you'd like to learn how to actually combo, I recommend watching this video right here. Thank you so much for watching. Boy.